Hey, everybody, it's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Thanks for being with me today. Okay, we have a growing world population, so we're going to need more food to feed people. Specifically, we're going to need more protein, but we're not getting more land and we're not getting more water. So how are we going to do this? Well, what if the air that we exhale could be turned into protein? I don't get it either. Let's figure it out with the person who does know. I want to welcome Dr. Lisa Dyson to the show today. Doctor, thank you for being with us. You are the founder and CEO of Air Protein. We're going to figure it out today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, now I rarely do this because we are live on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, so I rarely read bios because social media is a little bit ADD and they don't have time. But I have to read this bio because it's so kick-ass. So let's talk about it. Dr. Lisa Dyson spent years with the Boston Consulting Group identifying millions of dollars of inefficiencies. Here's where it gets juicy. She's done research in bioengineering and physics at Stanford, MIT, University of California, Berkeley, and Princeton, just to name a few. She has a PhD in physics from MIT. She's a Fulbright scholar from the University of London with an MS in physics, hold on to your bootstraps, with an emphasis on quantum fields and fundamental forces. And she has degrees in mathematics and physics from Brandeis. I just got to say, that's just a joy to read that bio. Let's start with the basics. What is Air Protein? And perhaps even more specifically, what is Air Protein flour?
Absolutely. So Air Protein is protein made from elements of the air. So we start with cultures, much like your yogurt cultures or cultures that are used to make cheese. And we add elements of the air, micronutrients, and we're able to make this really nutritious, nutrient dense, all the essential amino acids, bioavailable vitamins and minerals, this really nutritious flour. And that's what we call Air Protein flour.
Okay, so are you making the flour or are you making the actual meat? Because when I look on your website, you're talking about making meat from air, but you don't actually make the meat, right? You're making the flour.
Well, when we came up on this discovery and really started working to develop it, our question was, where can we have the most impact? And we started this journey, myself and a colleague, Dr. John Reed, we started this journey really to address climate change. And it turns out, as we all know here, that the biggest culprit when it comes to this climate change problem in the food industry is meat. So we do make meat from air.
Oh, you do? So you make the meat yourself. I thought you were just making the flour. Okay, well, let me see if I can understand this. When you say that you make Air Protein flour from the air, you're talking about the CO2 that we expel from our bodies, yes?
That's correct. CO2 is in the air that we're breathing right now. Oxygen, these are key inputs to our process.
Okay, let's see if I can bring up, for those of you who are lucky enough to be on social media with us, I want to show a graphic that you have on your website. You guys can see it here. It's called the closed loop carbon cycle. Maybe you can walk us through how, because it's still, I have to say, it's kind of still baffling how we can take CO2 and turn that into anything.
Absolutely. Well, so our inspiration came from the scientists at NASA. In the 60s and 70s, during the space program, they were working on how do you get astronauts to a distant planet or beyond safely and give them everything that they need on their journey. And one of the key things that you have to figure out is how to feed those astronauts. There's no Costco along the way. There's no way to pick up more nutrients. So how do you take what you have available and feed astronauts? And so one of the ideas that they came up with was to use cultures that actually use CO2 as a core feedstock, as a core ingredient. And then those organisms, those cultures would use that CO2, you'd capture it from the air that the astronauts are breathing, you'd feed it to those cultures along with other things. You need a power source, energy source. And then nutrients would then be created out of that. And the astronauts would then eat those nutrients, and then they would breathe out the carbon again in the form of carbon dioxide, which would then be captured and fed to the cultures, which would create the nutrients and so on. And that's the way that the scientists of NASA thought about creating closed loop carbon cycles on board spacecraft for long space journeys. And so that work essentially was sitting on the shelf. when myself and a colleague, Dr. John Reed, began working on it. We have this huge CO2 issue here on the planet. We have this issue where we're going to need to feed 10 billion people by 2050. So how can we take this and create a technology that can provide nutrients very sustainably for the future?
Okay, so for those of you who can see, this is so incredibly efficient. As I look at this graph here on our screen, that astronauts eat food and they exhale CO2, and then microbes take the CO2 and they also consume it, and then they produce food from consuming what we exhale, and then they produce stuff that we consume. And it's this running loop. Why would it just sit on the shelves at NASA? Like, why didn't they do anything with it?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. One is that it's the way food is made with plants. Plants also do this, but they take a long amount of time, longer, not huge amounts of time, but months, shall we say, in order to go through this cycle. And this particular process that NASA worked on is not your traditional fermentation. And so what we've done at Air Protein is we've reimagined fermentation, and we're doing it slightly differently. The way that fermentation is generally done to produce our yogurt, our cheese, our beer, our wine, CO2 is actually a byproduct. CO2 actually comes out of the fermentation vessel. And so this new way of doing fermentation is taking that CO2 instead and putting it as an input. And so it actually makes it carbon negative. And that's really what we're doing, is fermentation redefined in a way that makes it a carbon negative process.
So I just want to summarize for those of us who are maybe physics challenged, and clearly that would not be you, Doctor. So we have too much carbon as it is. So this is a double whammy. You're creating food. We need more food. We need more protein. And you're pulling carbon from the air too. So this is a good thing for the environment, in addition for people getting food. Do I have that right? Yeah,
absolutely. The process itself uses CO2, so it's a carbon negative process. And then if you want to look at other aspects of it, it uses significantly less land versus all the alternatives. And if you look at soy protein as an example, it would take a soy farm the size of Texas to give you the same amount of protein that you get from an air protein farm the size of Walt Disney World. So significant reduction of land use, and in fact, no arable land is required. So no farmland, no land that has certain climatic conditions and certain amount of rainfall and all those things. So we can actually create air protein farms all throughout the world in any geography. And then the final point I'll make is just around the water utilization. So you don't have issues with runoff and all those things. And in fact, it takes about 2,000 times less water versus soy protein to make our air protein flour.
Yes, so it's interesting. Usually on the show, I'm talking about the inefficiencies of animal agriculture, and we're talking about how plants are so much more efficient. And here you're talking about how air, or carbon dioxide, let's say, is even more efficient than plants. Plants still obviously requiring land and water, and you're even requiring less of those things than, let's say, producing soybean, and then soy flour from that. Maybe I'll circle back because I just want to make sure we all get this. Again, as we talk about what is air protein, and you say that it's taking carbon dioxide and very much like a yogurt, you're sort of redefining fermentation and you're adding nutrients so that you can produce this flour. Tell me exactly what would all, if you can, if it's not IP, what would all the ingredients be then in an air protein flour, which is then made into meat?
The air protein flour itself is rich in nutrients. So it has all the essential amino acids. It has bioavailable vitamins such as vitamin B12 and other vitamins as well, and as well as bioavailable minerals too. And so it's really nutrient dense, packed with nutritious ingredients or inputs for our, that we need for our health. So that would be kind of the core base. And then, as I mentioned before, what we're making at Air Protein is we're really attacking that problem of meat. And so we take our unit of innovation, our air protein, and then we apply culinary techniques, pressure, temperature. Think of going from a wheat flour to pasta, different culinary techniques to get the textures that one looks for when they bite into a juicy steak. And we add, flavors as well. And one of the benefits of the way that we're doing it is that we're really attacking the issue at its core. Meat is made of protein. And we're really introducing new types of protein to the world that have different functional properties that allow us to make, on one hand, a steak or chicken breast, and on the other hand, fish. And we're able to do that because we have this really versatile protein that has these different properties that, whether it's water holding capacity, oil holding capacity, et cetera, that allow us to then apply culinary techniques to get to those textures and flavors that you're looking for when you bite into animal-based meat.
So much to unpack there. Okay. Not air protein, but I have tried other powders, flours, something that needs to be hydrated to then make meat. And those products are very much still in the innovation stage. When I added water and tried to do something with it, it really didn't work out. And I've tried those products from a couple different companies. Let me just understand the flour part of it. So once you make this air protein flour, to make the meat, you would hydrate it again, yes?
Absolutely. One of the key ingredients in meat is water.
Yes. Okay, of course.
So
this makes
that's a huge component of meat. Yes.
Okay. And so I'm just going through the steps in my head. So then you've reconstituted the form, if you will, and then because you've added water to the flour. So now you've got something to work with. And then you're adding texture and you're adding flavors. How far from market are you with that meat product or fish or whatever you're doing first?
We haven't made any announcements as of yet. We'll let you know when we're ready to make an announcement. But
could announce on this show.
Absolutely. We have a number of different meat forms that are in development right now. And we're excited by the feedback that we're getting. In 2019 was when we made the world's first air-based meat. And we've been developing since then. And we can talk about the chicken as an example. We've gotten a lot of great feedback. And in fact, people said things like, if you didn't tell me that this wasn't made for meat, I wouldn't know. I'm of course biased, but other people said that we're getting very close. So that's something I'm excited by. Of course, it's a long process. This is a new way of making meat. And so it's something that we have a lot of great minds working on, but we're very excited by the progress we've made so far.
Yeah, it is really very exciting. So again, help me with some of the basics. You've got a flour, you add water, you've got a product to work with. How do you get texture into that? Or are you not going for whole cuts of meat? You're doing grounds and things like this.
One of the things that is promising is the ability to make these proteins with these different functional properties. And so it really does allow us to go after whole muscle meats. And so there's technologies that are known. There's some that we're innovating around as well, but like extrusion is a known type of technology that one can use in order to get those, the kind of the textures that you're looking for when you bite into meat. And so we leverage those types of technologies as well. And so it's primarily adding heat and pressure in different ways with different types of processes.
Would you consider this a processed food? Help me with that.
It's something, again, if you consider making pasta processed, so it's something that you're applying kind of standard culinary techniques to in order to get to that texture, as it were. So just think of it as cooking.
As cooking. Yes, I love this. And really think of it as how we started this show. You started your career in finding millions of dollars of savings by showing the world at Boston Consulting Group inefficiencies in the system. And we know that our food supply system is wildly inefficient. So I love that we're looking at other ways to feed the world with less resources, because we've got a 30% growth, give or take, in the population, but we're not getting more land and we're certainly not getting more water. And these will be the things that people fight for, I think, in the future, people and governments. So, okay, taking us back just a step, you talked about reimagining or reinventing fermentation. And maybe you can help me a little bit understand that. You gave the example of, very much like a yogurt, you're going to ferment the product. But what is it exactly that you're fermenting? Help me.
Well, just like yogurt. So my husband is actually Turkish. And so early on, when I went back to his family, his mom taught me how to make yogurt. And you start with a culture that you already have, yogurt that you already have, and you add milk, you boil the milk, and your culture is actually going to eat that milk. You let it sit for a while, and then you end up with the culture essentially propagating, essentially growing off of the milk that you're feeding it. And so that's an example of how we do fermentation today in a standard process to make food. The way that we do it at Air Protein is slightly different in that we don't feed the culture milk, we feed it carbon dioxide. We start off with renewable energy and we split water and we feed it the hydrogen from that water. We have oxygen involved. You need a nitrogen source. Again, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide are all elements of the air that we're breathing right now. So we feed the culture those core inputs along with some minerals and micronutrients. And then we wait essentially, and the culture essentially grows. And so that's similar to what happens with yogurt, with cheese, with many of the foods that we have.
Kombucha, yeah.
Exactly. And so that's the process itself.
And okay, we talked early on in this interview about time, what a time saver this is in addition to land and water. So how long would it take to produce all the beef that we produce in 1 year globally? I don't know if you can do this math, but if anybody could, you could. Of all the
Yes.
meat that we produce in 1 year globally, how long would it take to do that with Air Protein flour?
That's a good number to have. So why don't I come back to you with that? But
Fair
what
enough.
I'll say is that the comparison is with meat to make steak today, it takes 2 years.
Right.
That's kind of insane.
And so wasteful.
It takes 2 years, and that cow that you're feeding it constantly, and lots of nutrients that are going in and going out that are not being used ultimately, and is emitting a whole lot of greenhouse gases, the same greenhouse gas footprint as a car. So that by the time you get that steak, it's been 2 years worth of resources used. It's been the greenhouse gas footprint of a car, versus our process, which requires no arable land to make that protein at all. And it's just a matter of hours to days. So when we have our process, our farm, as it were, up and running, then you're continuously getting protein from that Air Protein farm. And so it's just a matter of hours to get the equivalent amount of protein that you get from, to make a steak.
Wow. Yeah. I love, again, the efficiencies here. And I'll also say, animals being the most inefficient, and you're saying even plants aren't as efficient as you would like, but animals being the most inefficient, because not only do they take all this time and do they take all these resources, when you grow the grains, you cut down these trees, which pull carbon from the air, but okay, we don't leave the trees. We cut them all down to grow grains. These grains have fiber and they have protein. We could have just given those grains to people, but we don't. We give them to animals. And then those animals, they're wonderful protein concentrators, but they poop out all the fiber, and you cannot be healthy without fiber, which is why meat, and I didn't know this myself until like 2 years ago, meat has no fiber. And it's bizarre because you look at it and you think, but it looks so fibrous. How could it not have fiber? But it has no fiber. And so when you think of your overall health, which is also a resource, if you will, your energy, your ability to put out in this world is directly affected by your health. Don't want to squander your health either. So it's not just protein, it's what package does your protein come in? And you want that protein to have fiber and nutrients and B12 and all these things that you're talking about here. Although, maybe let's talk about that. We haven't really talked about fiber. I think of microbes. Let me backtrack. I think of microbes as like, oh my gosh, why aren't we doing more with microbes? So what benefits are there besides how prolific it can be in saving time, water, land? What are the other nutritional benefits, let's say, of microbes and having them in the process?
Yeah, and one thing a comment that I'll make, my grandparents were farmers. My mother grew up on a farm. So definitely there's a lot of farmers out there that are working regenerative agriculture and ways to be much more sustainable. So that's exciting as well. But we do have to do something different in terms of the large scale industrial farming that we do today. But if you look at microbes, there's a plethora of nutrients that you can get from microbes. And with ours in particular, we're focused on that protein issue, but we're focused on protein coming along with vitamins that are bioavailable and minerals that are bioavailable as well. Like that's really our focus. But you can also get heart healthy oils that are monounsaturated oils, et cetera, omega oils. These are types of things you can get from microbes and beyond. There's just an abundance of nutrients that you can make with using, cultures essentially. And I'm excited that there's many companies working on that too.
And we'll talk about that in a second. So what's exciting about microbes, as I understand it, so people often confuse this and they think, well, we have to eat animals because animals make protein. News flash. Animals do not make protein, neither do people. Only plants and microbes make protein. And so microbes being very protein dense and, obviously tiny, that's why they're called microbes. And so they just don't take up space. I mean, there's just, why has it taken us this? Why isn't the production of food from microbes more prolific?
It's out there.
It's out there, but not very much.
I eat a lot of cheese. I like my Pinot Noir, miso soup, pickles. It is out there. Kimchi, sauerkraut. There's a number of different types of food that use fermentation today. And there just needs to be more. I think this explosion of this alternative meat sector is quite exciting. And I'm happy that, the trailblazers out there that really ready the consumers to this concept that you can have meat that's made from something other than animals. They've been doing a phenomenal job with that. And this, the wave of companies and organizations and researchers, innovators that have been working on this since is great. And it's because consumers are demanding it. Consumers are looking for alternatives that are healthier and more sustainable. Like those are things that consumers want. So I'm really happy that is an exploding area. And we're going to see more foods as a result of that are made from fermentation, that are not made from animals. It's just going to continue to grow.
Yeah, it's going to continue to grow. And you talked about that other companies are starting to do things with microbes, not as you are doing with carbon dioxide, but maybe taking genes from animals, and grossly overstating here, but mapping those genes onto a microbe and then fermenting that microbe. And so it becomes a producer of that animal protein. And then you can take sugar and cream and make ice cream from it, for example. So there's precision fermentation. There's also biomass fermentation, which is more the growing of whole slabs of microbes, again, in a very short time with very little land and water. And that can produce, biomass fermentation processes. So there is lots going on in the innovative space with microbes, and they're sort of parallel to you in that no land, no water, no hormones, no antibiotics, these benefits of not being in the factory farm situation. And then there's also cultivated meat, of course, which is not a fermented process, but again, saving on land, water, time, hormones, antibiotics, et cetera. So how do you see air protein fitting into that landscape of novel proteins as we shift to a new global food supply system?
All those are necessary, as you said, as we shift to a new way of making food, and in particular, a new way of making meat. Those are instrumental to solving this challenge. I mean, the meat industry itself is a $1.4 trillion industry, so it's humongous. There's a lot of people buying a lot of meat out there. And what's different about us and what's unique is that we have this carbon negative process. Carbon negative fermentation, as it were. If you put a box around our system, CO2 comes in and the protein comes out, so that when we make our meat, you compare that meat on a steak, that meat on a plate, as it were, to a piece of meat that came from a cow, a steak, as it were, then you're going to get a huge carbon footprint versus a carbon negative process that made that. And because of the carbon nature, the fact that we're doing kind of reverse fermentation, you can call it air-based fermentation. The fact that we're doing that and we don't require any arable land for our protein, we don't require sugar or any of those other kind of inputs, means that we use significantly less land versus the alternatives. And of course, along with that comes significantly less water. And so in essence, what we have is the most sustainable way to make protein. So that allows us to make ultra sustainable meat. And we're focused not just on the sustainability, although that's why we built the company, but we're focused on nutrition and delivering nutrients to consumers as well.
Before we leave the realm of microbes, I want to pronounce the name of the microbe that you work with predominantly, which is hydrogentrophs, if I've got that right. Is there anything particular about that microbe we should know? And also the reverse, is there any risk associated with microbe? I mean, no, as you say, we're fermenting lots of things in our lives, tea and kimchi and other things, but anything particular we should know about hydrogentrophs?
Well, the main thing about them is that instead of producing carbon dioxide, which if you have a traditional fermentation process, your microbe produces carbon dioxide, this one consumes carbon dioxide. That's the main thing to know about it. And then for its energy source, it uses hydrogen, which is why it has that name, because it likes hydrogen. That's where it gets its energy from. Yeah. And we get that from renewable power and water. And we're able to split that water, which is H2O, and we're able to get the hydrogen and we feed that to these cultures.
And where does the original culture come from?
Well, hydrogenotrophs grow in places that, or even this larger category of these types of microbes, they grow in places that are typically below the surface of the earth, like hydrothermal vents, as an example. You can find them in soil. There's a number of places that, because the microbes that are on the surface of the earth, either they're using photosynthesis plus CO2, or they like, carbohydrate source. But these types of microbes, they typically grow in places that are below the surface of the earth.
Basics here. Did you discover this microbe? No, it already existed. They had discovered it around NASA time, or does the whole world know about hydrogentrophs except me? Has it been around for a while?
It's really interesting. If you look at microbiology, if you look at fermentation, the whole field of fermentation, there's a number of different types of cultures that are used very frequently, whether it's, yeast is an example. We've all heard of yeast, and we know that yeast is a part of our food process, our food production processes. When people started looking at alternatives, algae became one that people were looking at in particular. There's a lot of work, the pharmaceutical industry really looked at E. coli as its workhorse. And so when people started saying, hey, maybe we can make other things with fermentation, E. coli was another type of microbe that was looked at as well as a workhorse. So there's just a number of different types of microbes that have been looked at in this industry. And it just so happens that this class of microbes were overlooked and understudied. And one might ask why. And the reason that NASA looked at these, class of cultures is because they had a different type of problem to solve. That we're looking for things that are going to solve the problems that you're facing. And in that case, the problem that they were trying to solve was, we're in a spaceship. That spaceship has a set amount of resources, nothing more, nothing less. That spaceship has a set amount of space. You're not going to get any more surface area. And so, if you're growing plants, then you need a lot of time, you need a lot of space, a lot of surface area. So they had to figure out, or they were working on figuring out how to grow plants more efficiently, how to grow things that would allow them to feed the astronauts using minimal space and minimal resources. And so they just had a different type of question to answer, a different type of problem that they were seeking to address. And that's really why they looked in a different place and for a different solution. And then when myself and Dr. John Reed, when we came around, we were approaching the problem kind of in a different way as well. We weren't veterans in the fermentation industry thinking about, how can I do fermentation differently, right? That's not where we came from. We were scientists. He has a biology degree, a material science and engineering degree, a degree in math. He's also worked in the physics lab. So we're scientists, and myself, a business person. And my dad actually was an entrepreneur. He was the president of a chain of 55 hair salons growing up. So we kind of had our different kind of diverse background, and we looked at the problem quite differently. And that's what led us to this solution that is something that's new that we're bringing to the food space.
Yeah, I think it's just so very exciting. And it's interesting how this race to space that is on, has everybody focused on space. And I'm so glad that some of the research that's been done to get us to space is actually helping us here on what Buckminster Fuller calls, spaceship Earth. I mean, there's still a lot that's worth working on here on Earth. So I'm so glad that you're focused on producing more food for this planet, as well as potentially another planet if we get there, if we do that. So how long do you think, I know you told us you're not announcing anything yet in terms of like a product that we can all try, but what about mainstream adoption? Do you have any predictions on when that might be?
Mainstream adoption, we expect to be straightforward and happen soon. And it's because, we're offering something that will meet the demands that consumers are now having. And those demands being, they want nutritious food and they want food that's not going to break the planet, essentially. And, when I have an aunt and uncle, both over 80 years old, and when they became vegetarians, I knew something was happening here. They're from my family, my mom's side of the family, they're from Louisiana, and there was meat in everything growing up. When I stopped eating meat, it was challenging at my family reunions to get anything, essentially, other than maybe the cornbread or something. But when they became vegetarians, it became clear to me that there's something here. And their children and more and more of my family members becoming vegetarians because their doctors are telling them, hey, you should move away from this high meat, high red meat, et cetera, diet to something that's more, nutritious, more plant-based, more micronutrients and macronutrients that don't come from animals. And so that's something that consumers are more and more looking for, whether it's your meatless Monday people, your flexitarians, it's becoming more mainstream in and of itself. And many people are doing that for the environment. People are seeing with the fires, with the storms. For myself in particular, I started this journey when in 2005, I went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. As I mentioned, my family's from Louisiana. And when I went back to Louisiana, this time it was quite a different scene that I went back to. And just thinking about how this was a huge weather event that led to so much destruction. So many people lost their lives, their houses, their loved ones, shelter. And that got me thinking about how can I be a part of the solution with respect to climate change? And more people are really seeing that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's impacting lives every day. So as consumers are demanding more environmentally friendly food and more healthy, nutritious food, as long as it's delicious, which happily people so far are saying that what we're making is delicious, then, they will definitely, I expect and I hope and I'm excited to one day see everyone eating air-based chicken, air-based fish, air steak.
Godspeed. I love what you say about people recognizing climate change because they're literally living through it. In California, it used to be a fire here, a fire there. Now it's fire season. Fire season used to be 2 or 3 months. Now fire season is like 6 months. Hurricanes on the East Coast used to be a hurricane here, a hurricane there. Now it's like hurricane season, and it's one right after the other. So, how many times do you have to get hit upside the head before you realize that your race is about to perish? I sort of kid not. It is with this sort of gobsmacking comment that I make that I'm always surprised that the US government isn't doing more to fund research in this area. I would think if I were a politician, I'd be concerned with my own longevity. And there's no faster way to be bounced out of power than when you have a population that is struggling for food. And we saw this during the coronavirus. The virus upset labor markets and food supplies. So we know how tenuous our food supply system is, basically because it's so inefficient. So I would think that governments around the world would be more supportive. Now we see support from Singapore, we see Israel, but my public service announcement here is I'd like to see the U.S. get more research dollars right into your hands, Dr. Dyson. But there is some money coming into your hands. So fermented proteins as a general sort of investment class sort of snuck up from behind. So it used to be cultivated meat and plant-based were getting the big venture capital dollars. But last year in 2020, if you look at innovative proteins as a whole, there was more money spent in 2020 than all of 2010 to 2019 put together. And in 2020, fermented proteins, which is not exactly what you're doing, but you're in that realm, I'll call it, took 1/3 of the investment dollars. So I'm wondering what kind of person invests in air protein? Is it the person who's all about the race for space, or is it the person who's more interested in the shifting global food supply system?
We're happy to have a number of investors, and our lead investors are ADM, which is the world's largest fermentation company by assets and North America's largest protein company, and as an investor. So obviously they're investing because of food. And so they're a part of making food more sustainable. They're a part of they have a lot of assets that they're really working to bring more startups under the umbrella, as it were, under the tent, and to leverage their assets in order to scale this new type of food production. Barclays has a sustainability fund, and it was in particular their sustainability fund that did this investment in us. So investors that are looking, that know that we have to look at ESG, we have to look at solutions that are going to be around. If you want to have a great business, that business itself needs to be sustainable. So if you start your business based on those types of principles, then you have a higher likelihood of being around and being relevant in this new day and age. So that's one of the types of investors that are out there that's growing. That's a new category of investment that is just taking off. Sustainability, impact, ESG investing. And Google Ventures is another investor, and they invest in innovators. Anyone that's doing innovation, that's cutting edge, that's leading its category. So that's really what they focus on. So we have a bunch of different types of investors that have invested in Air Protein. And I think broadly speaking, if you look at the space, there's been a lot more kind of investor interests that are maybe traditionally they're focused on IT, traditionally they're focused in other areas, but they see, the food industry itself is ripe for innovation. Just as we talked earlier, the fact that it takes 2 years to make a steak tells you that this industry is ripe for innovation. So many investors are seeing that in the food and protein space specifically, but broadly speaking, impact, looking at the food we eat and making it more healthy and more sustainable is something that will impact people's lives. So that's definitely something that we're seeing growing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how large companies like ADM are almost looking for more of a partnership relationship than it is of, we're going to buy you up and then try to run you. It's more a recognition of, we don't know this much about this technology, but we know that the food supply system doesn't work as it currently is. So we're going to, give you our big distribution channels, our bigger budgets, our reach around the world. And we're looking for that know-how. And it becomes this nice bridge that wasn't really the way people invested before, or large companies invested before. So it's an interesting and exciting investment landscape space for sure. Always hard to do. But if you look at, I used to, on this show, used to say, oh, what do you predict for the next 10 years? Then I moved it to 5 years. Oh, why even bother? So now I'm going to say, where do you see the food supply shift happening mostly in the next 3 years?
I think that just the example that I gave of my family and my family of hardcore meat eaters that are now shifting away from meat and becoming focused on alternative food choices that are more nutritious. I think that shift is what we're seeing in the next 3 years. We're seeing more and more people that being a vegetarian is not going to be as uncommon. Everyone will have one or several people in their household, depending on how big their household is, that are eating plant-based diets, vegetarian diets, and convincing those that are in their households to reduce their meat consumption. So I think that is a trend that we're seeing now. And some of that was brought on, I'd say, by COVID. COVID was very interesting in that because we saw that health was a key determining factor as to whether or not you got really sick, that caused people to start thinking about their health more. And we saw what happened in the meat industry. We saw so many meat packaging facilities shut down, or not shut down, but have hundreds and thousands of cases across the globe, in US, Canada, Brazil, Germany, across the globe. That was something that we saw. And people, as a result, there were a lot of more news programs that caused people to meet their meat, as it were, and see how it was made. And that caused people to shift and to become more aware. So I think that trend that we're seeing now will continue to grow.
Yeah, I think what you say is really exciting. I think what you're going to see is more of the meat and dairy companies looking to either partner, as ADM has sort of done with you, that sort of nice, friendly investment relationship, or they're going to just start their own. I think some of the technology is out there enough for, let's say, burgers or something, that they're just doing their own innovation centers. They're, putting money from within. If that money isn't going to come from governments, I think you're going to see a lot of dollars spent by what we formerly would have considered maybe competitors that now we're perhaps perceiving as partners in crime. I know from my standpoint as a journalist, yes, I want to see those distribution channels that used to be meat now have plant-based options or air protein options, but I also want those advertising budgets. I want the message to be out just how manly it is to be healthy and to, eat your plants or eat your air, if I can say that. So I think we're going to see a lot of those kind of companies getting in big. Okay, so now to get to know you a little bit better. I mean, we know what you do and your dedication and your mission and just how gosh darn smart you are. Now to get to know you a little bit more as a person, I'm wondering, as you work on this, is there anything in particular that you'd like to be known for? Is it your inventions in general? Is it your help for the planet environmentally? What would you like to be known for?
That's an interesting question. So going back to when I started working on this, it really was about the planet and having an impact. My dad being an entrepreneur, that is something that I grew up around, kind of entrepreneurship, being at BCG, helping companies solve their business problems. And then as a scientist, just wanting to understand and loving to understand how the world works. I think when I got into this specifically, it was really that climate change piece. And my co-founder, Dr. John Reed, his whole, career has been all around helping to create solutions that have a positive impact on the climate as well. And so I think for both of us, that's really what we want is to have an impact and to be a part of a team that will have an impact. That's what we would love to do. We happily have a great team that is so aligned and focused on this mission, and that is excited to come into work every day and make their contribution towards having this global scale, potentially in the future, impact of reshaping how food is made, in particular how meat is made. So I'd love to be a part of that. And as I'm seeking to do that in the long run, I'm just taking each step day by day and being a part of a great team that's trying to move the ball forward and make progress.
And as you move that ball forward, I'm wondering what you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now.
10 years ago, that's a great question. What did I wish I would have known now? Well, that's hard to say because, many left and right turns that I didn't expect along the way as I've been on this roller coaster ride journey of entrepreneurship, starting Converti first and then Air Protein. There's many things that would have changed the trajectory, but I guess I can't say that I would want to change the trajectory. Maybe I would have never met my husband. I don't know. So
yes, right. Yeah.
But what I'd say to an entrepreneur today, I guess I'd say that the road is not going to look like you think it looks now. There will be lots of twists and turns. And that's something that I knew though. I grew up in a house with an entrepreneur. I grew up with many family members that were entrepreneurs. So I knew that it would be a windy road. I knew that there's many ups and downs, but I would tell an entrepreneur that today. And what's most important is just is probably to set your sights on something big and significant that'll have an impact in your life, your family's lives, the people in your community or the planet, whatever you're trying to target. Just set your sights on something that is big, I would suggest, and then enjoy each moment.
Yes, I love what you say. Set your sights on something big. I always say, I wish I had found my voice earlier. I wish I had used it, that power of my voice, to speak your mind, to speak your truth, that which you believe in, that which you'd like to see change in an area. Get out there, use your voice, vote with your dollars, align your voice and your dollars for extra bonus points. I always say that. So as you say, if you had tips, you would tell people to set their sights big. What would you say to young girls getting into science?
Yeah, if they love science, and just do it. It's understanding how the world works for me was very rewarding as I studied different fields in science. And so if that's rewarding to them, it's a way to have impact, to understand how the world works even better than we do today. Maybe discover some new principles on how the world works. And if you want to be a part of developing new innovations in technology, science is really behind a lot of that. So I started with focusing on math because I didn't know which scientific field I wanted to study, and I knew math was a core underlying, fundamental skill set for all the sciences, and then ultimately chose physics. And so I'd say just pursue what you love, and if you love science, then there's a lot of opportunities waiting for you.
Yes, and I would say the world is ready for you. I don't know that they were ready for female scientists, but that's a whole other show, right? We could get into that. But now I think they're ready. So no holds barred. Go after it. Go get it. Never take no. Get out there. Get into science. The world needs more female scientists. So the world is your oyster. I think it's finally ready for you. It took a while, but it's there for you right now. So I would just say, young girls, go get it. My last quickie question for you on the way out. If you're ever, well, two quickie questions. If you're ever having a bad day, you're running around the universe and it hasn't gone your way, is there something that you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
What do I tell myself to get myself back in the groove? It's not that I tell myself something, but I focus on what I'm grateful for. And there's so many things in life to be grateful for. And in that moment, and whether it's whatever's happening in that moment, I focus on what I'm grateful for, what are the things that are very positive. And so that's what I do.
Yes. Lovely. Lovely comment. Okay. Now this truly is my last question for you. So again, you're running around, but this time you're so busy, you haven't had lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Snack. Well, we all have many things that we have learned how to cook, shall we say, during the pandemic. For some people, it's sourdough bread and other things. One thing that I like now is we bought an air fryer and plantains, air fried plantains.
I'm going to make that. My boyfriend loves plantains and he's always frying them up. And I'm saying like, oh, the oil, stop. We have an air fryer.
There's an air theme here.
Yes. I like it. I like how you roll. Dr. Lisa Dyson, I want to thank you so much for all that you're doing, not just that you are helping to shift the global food supply system, which you are doing, and not just that you're helping to get people more nutritional food at a faster pace, more efficiently made way. Perhaps even, we didn't even talk about price parity, but perhaps even at price parity or better than, that's always what we're going for. But you are such a role model to young women getting into science. I want to thank you for all that you do. And I hope that you will come back on this show and give us the scoop, if you will, when you finally get into market.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for all that you do as well.
Oh, I so appreciate it. Dr. Dyson, don't go anywhere. Everybody else on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, I love you, and I will see you next Tuesday.